When deputies arrived, they found a young lady. Her name was Jerri Vernon. She had been shot in the abdomen. She was transferred to a Glennis hospital, and she died at 14:18 or 16:18, 4:18 in the afternoon. My deputies arrested Matthew Culbertson. He's 26 years old. He was brought in, questioned, and booked in, taken to the Southeastern Regional Jail. This morning he was taken to court. With me is Keller Blackburn, the Athens County Assistant Prosecutor. He presented the case to the grand jury today, and I'll let him tell you what they decided.
The grand jury returned a multiple count indictment, 4 counts of felonious assault, 3 counts for pointing an unloaded weapon at different individuals in the home and pulling the trigger, 1 count of felonious assault for the shooting of the victim, murder under the felony murder rule, then a count of F1 involuntary manslaughter, a count of misdemeanor weapons while being intoxicated, an F3 involuntary manslaughter, and an F3 reckless homicide. Each count, other than the misdemeanor, carry a 3-year mandatory firearm specification, and all of the felonious assault firearm specifications would have to be consecutive to each other for a minimum mandatory of 12 years.
You're going to have to run those by me again. I
Yes.
heard felony murder in there?
Yes, 4 counts of felonious assault. There were 3 victims in the home who were never actually fired upon. However, he pointed the weapon at them and pulled the trigger.
Okay.
The state would allege that's the allegation. The state alleges that's a felonious assault, and the grand jury did return an indictment for that. A felonious assault for the actual pulling of the trigger, which fired the fatal bullet. Then murder for the death that resulted as a proximate result of the felonious assault. An involuntary manslaughter, which was that the victim died as a proximate result of felonies that were committed. The state alleged at the grand jury several, but being child endangering, felonious assault, again, burglary, being in the home without permission. He wasn't indicted for those underlying felonies, but those felonies would be an underlying predicate offense for an F1 involuntary manslaughter. Okay. An misdemeanor, weapons while intoxicated, and then an F3 felonious assault. I'm sorry, pardon me, an F3 involuntary manslaughter tied to that, and then reckless homicide, which is also an F3.
Whose house was this? Do we know?
We're not releasing the name of the residence. It was on Biddyville Road.
What was the relationship of the deceased woman to the suspect, to the defendant?
I'll let the sheriff.
They were friends. The background is the call we got was at this residence. They had been drinking alcohol earlier in the day. They had been outside practice shooting a weapon. When they came back into the residence, the Culbertson boy pointed the weapon at the victim, and she asked if that weapon was loaded, and he remarked and pulled the trigger, and at that point she was shot and transported to the hospital.
You say he remarked, or what did he remark?
He made a remark that either it was we'll see, or I don't know. I don't know what the remark was at this point.
And this is the felony murder. This is the same thing. This is the proximate cause. And how is that charged out exactly?
It is that he's charged with felonious assault being the underlying. That he knowingly caused physical harm by means of a deadly weapon is the allegation, and that the victim died as a proximate result of that felonious assault.
What escalates the charge from the involuntary manslaughter, which he had municipal court, to murder now?
The case was under investigation at the time. The Athens County Sheriff's deputies and the sheriff himself made contact with the prosecutor's office. We knew certain things at the time. The investigation continued, as was reported in most of the local media. And by the time we got to the conclusion of the investigation, all the facts are presented to a grand jury, and a grand jury returns an indictment based on the facts. Once it becomes and the felonious assault would be what would be the new charge. Once it becomes felonious assault, it's murder. It's a crime of violence. It's a felony 1 or felony 2.
Sounds like from the new charges, or for the charges that are indicted today, that he pointed this at several other people. So he pointed the gun, clicked, didn't fire, clicked again, another person, then the 4th person, it fires, and shoots the woman?
There was two different times here. He had pointed the weapon at people at the house earlier that day.
Okay.
After that, they had gone outside and were practice shooting, went back into the home, and that's when the shooting occurred.
So
So
after
we're talking about two different times.
After he went back into the home, he just pointed at one person, which was the victim.
Right. And without going into the facts of the case, there was a conversation between them about whether or not the weapon was loaded. We're not going to release what his statement was or what her question was, but there was that conversation, and immediately at the conclusion of that conversation is when the shot was fired.
Whether, leaving aside the fact that he probably wouldn't have been arrested under these circumstances, but even had there been no injury or fatality, it was a crime for him to point an unloaded weapon at a person and pull the trigger.
According to State versus Tate, which is a Cuyahoga County appellate case, pointing a gun at someone is a felonious assault.
And it's your opinion, not to ask you to try the case ahead of time or anything, but I mean, given the facts, what you think the facts are, does that support the felony murder case, even if he did this unknowingly, had no hostile intent, had no...
Well, people with firearm training would say you never point a firearm at anything you don't intend to shoot.
Yeah.
And he, if the firearm had gone off accidentally, that would be a different story. The allegation here is that the firearm didn't go off accidentally.
Okay.
Where does the knowingly play in that he may have been intoxicated during this?
Voluntary intoxication is not a defense to a crime.
Do we know
Specifically stated out in the Iowa Revised Code.
Do we know how intoxicated? Do we have numbers on that yet?
We don't want to release that information.
Above the legal limit?
He's charged with weapons while intoxicated.
Is there a limit, statutorily set limit for this particular kind of thing, as opposed to driving for being under disability for a weapon? Is it the same as, like, is it .08?
Just like driving, .08 is a per se intoxicated, but someone who's .06 could still be convicted of driving while intoxicated if they were actually intoxicated. So the legal limit is a per se. Once you become that, you're per se intoxicated. You can be intoxicated even if you're below that.
So there's not a number that would trigger him having a weapon under disability by being intoxicated. It's whether he has alcohol and is behaving intoxicated, basically.
Absolutely.